Movements in support of gender equality and women's rights have increased in recent years. At the same time, we are experiencing a backlash on women's rights and fundamental freedoms all over the world. Where are we now, and what will it take to finally achieve equality? To help us to get a better understanding of this, we have invited Dr. Lina Abirafi, who is the executive director of the Arab Institute for Women and the Lebanese American University. So Lina will be speaking with us about gender equality, women's rights, and the global backlash. So let's give her a warm round of applause. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Let us go back in time for a second. I'd like to take you back to 1989, so 30 years ago. And there was a young Lebanese Palestinian woman, a child of many conflicts, in a class called Comparative Women's History. But rather than studying women's history, this young girl ended up studying the history of violence against women, seeing images of a bound foot, a widow burning herself on her husband's funeral pyre, women who undergo surgeries that result in deformities, all in the name of beauty, female genital cutting. That girl was me 30 years ago, and that course really set the course for my life. And in that moment, 14-year-old me made a decision, and I said, I want to be the person who changes what it means to be a woman in the world, or at least in my world. And I want to be part of building a feminist future in my lifetime. Well, here we are, and it's 30 years later. And I'm with you today, and let me be honest, I wish I didn't have to be. Because the fact that we still have these kinds of meetings and discussions and conferences and convenings and events really means that we haven't achieved our goals. We're still talking about it. I'd like us to no longer be talking about it. It is 2019, after all, as we often like to say, and I don't think this is where I expected that we would be for women in 2019. And this is a world, I can tell you, it's a world I do not accept. In this room, I think we're 600. And out there, well, there are 3.7 billion women. I mean, you've heard a little bit already what the world looks like for those 3.7 billion women. You've heard some of the awful statistics. 200 years to close the gender gap. I personally will not be around to see it. I don't know what plans you have for a longer life than I. I'm getting a little bit impatient. We know that women and girls are still the majority of the world's poor. You hear about how they're underrepresented in every aspect of public life and political life and leadership and decision-making. You heard about violence, when we talk about domestic violence in those 49 countries. In the other countries, the other part of the story is that there are laws, but the laws are incomplete or unapplied or outright ignored. And they are missing critical elements, like, for instance, marital rape is absent from a lot of domestic violence legislation, which means that you surrender rights to your own body when you get married. So we have a long way to go. We know that 750 million girls were married before the age of 18. These are massive numbers. I forget how many zeros. It's so overwhelming. And that's 33,000 girls a day, or one girl every 2 seconds. And I don't know how long I've been speaking, but I'm not even going to count because I think this is too much for me to hear. And the one I do hate the most is the 1 in 3, because it gets stuck in my throat every time. And I tell people, think of 3 women and now pick one. And, and it makes my skin crawl. And I can't accept this kind of world. And I don't even know where we begin to advocate for women's rights when the world looks like that. And that's what I asked myself 30 years ago when I started. And it's what I ask myself actually every day since then. And now, here we are a month away from the International Conference on Population and Development in Nairobi. I don't know if anyone's going to be there. It seems I will be. I keep trying to refuse these events. And I remember Cairo 1994, I watched it happen. I was not there, but I thought, this is our moment, this is our watershed, this is our landmark event. This is going to be the change that we need for women and girls. The next year was Beijing. I said, all right, it's this. For sure it's this. This is going to bring equality. This is going to be the game changer for us. Well, here we are again. And then 5 years later, we had our first UN Security Council resolution, 1325. These are major milestones and important events. And every single time I think this is the one. This is the one that's going to make the change. Well, by the time all these things have evolved, I was already in the field. I was already doing the work. I was working in emergencies on sexual violence. And I covered, in about 20 years, 20 countries, places like Afghanistan, Congo, Chad, Central African Republic, Mali, Haiti, Papua New Guinea. We don't have enough time for this list. And I can tell you one thing, and that is that I've not done my job. Because I've ended violence against women nowhere. Nowhere. And I've made the world safer for women nowhere. But it's not just my job, I know that. Although some days it feels that way. I know we're not alone in the struggle. The context is different, but the cause is still the same. And we say all the time, this is a universal responsibility. We have everything on paper, all the right ingredients that make it look perfect. We say this is a human rights imperative. We talk about equality and empowerment. We throw around very big words very comfortably all the time. And with every event, we claim that this is going to be the catalyst, and it's this one, and it's this one, it's the next one, it's the next one. Meanwhile, we sound like a broken record, or at least I think I do, because we've discussed and conferenced and workshopped this to no end. And still, I think we failed in our duty to protect women and girls. And my heart is very heavy for that. And this is not what 14-year-old me expected, and this is not what she accepts, nor what I accept, nor what any of us should accept. However, I give you some good news, a tiny bit of good news that you've heard, is that women's movements are increasing, and they're increasing everywhere. Now, with good news always comes the unfortunate bad news, and that's the undeniable backlash that is also increasing, and it's increasing everywhere. So anyway, 2030, we're pushing forward our Sustainable Development Goals. We're told that we've reduced the prevalence of female genital mutilation, right? So we're measuring against these goals. Incidentally, female genital mutilation, that was the first paper that I wrote in my women's history class at age 14. So I was a very serious child. And we've reduced early marriage, although it still exists. But I want to park for 1 second and unpack early marriage, because for me, I think words matter. And I like to remind myself of what I am doing, so I know why I am doing it, and so I can refocus better on how I am doing it. So the challenge with early marriage is it sounds like a very benign adjective that describes an act. You could also say you had an early lunch. But what we've done actually is strip the power and the politics and the patriarchy from this. Because when we say early marriage, what do we actually mean? More often than not, it is marriage of a girl child. More often than not, it is to an older man. More often than not, that results in a sexual relationship. So, sex with a girl child, what is that? That's rape. And when we put it that way, I think we're reminded of the urgency of our work. And these words then make way for actions that are stronger and more targeted and more deliberate. Because I don't think that we have any time to waste. Because we are in a world that allows a girl to be married and then to be raped every 2 seconds. And then I don't accept it. So we've got a lot to do with 2030 and our agenda. We've got to eliminate legal discrimination. We've got to change all these unfair social norms. We have to ensure that women have rights to decide what to do with their own bodies. I don't know why we still argue these kinds of things. We have to bring women into politics and the economy and leadership and decision-making in every aspect of life. And in some countries, we're going backwards, very clearly. Research that was released in the US recently revealed that for 1 in 16 American women, their first sexual experience was a rape. 1 in 16. And then there are states in the US, Alabama and others, that are stripping away rights one at a time and very rapidly. And then leadership that is deliberately harmful to women, even while claiming that rights and equality is harmful. So this is a world, again, I don't accept And 2019 isn't supposed to look like this in countries that we thought were stable and rights that we thought were stable. I think it's clear we're living in dangerous times, which means that we have to step up and show greater courage in the face of that danger. Anyway, we owe it to every 14-year-old. I owe it to myself and to all of us and to the 3.7 billion. We tend to use money, I think, as evidence of our commitment. And there was, again, research released earlier this year that examined the amount of money going to fund violence against women programming in humanitarian emergencies. And surprisingly, asking where is the money, because the evidence showed that we're letting down women by underfunding this issue. So given that we know that that violence against women remains severely underfunded, we also know, and we saw from this research, that global commitment is too slow, too short-term, too small. So an example is Yemen in 2018. The amount of money that was requested to end violence against women was 24 million. The amount that was received that would have an indirect impact, other types of programming that would positively impact or end violence against women, at least provide adequate prevention and response, the amount received was 3 million. And the amount that we dedicated exclusively to violence against women prevention was 0. So our rhetoric doesn't match our reality. We need real money, no nonsense, real money, not just in crisis. It needs to be smart and meaningful, multi-year, flexible, operational money for women's organizations. Because if we're not funding these women's groups before there is a crisis, we are going to perpetuate a crisis. We need to see these things through the lens of women's safety. Women are a social barometer. Look at early warning indicators, right? If women are not safe, then no one is safe. And too many women are living in fear. And even the fear of violence is actually a form of violence. You know, now I work in the Arab region that's at the bottom of all social indicators, with the greatest security challenges and the widest gender gap. Out of the 10 worst countries in the world, 5 are Arab. So you can imagine that we're not doing very well. And meanwhile, I run an institute that is 46 years old, an academic activist hybrid, the first of its kind in the region, covering the 22 countries. And I run it on a shoestring budget. We just don't get any funding. And I'm very often the lone Arab voice in the room and on stage. You know, in the Arab region, we often say that we're on the brink of an emergency. There's always a perpetual crisis, a perma-crisis. But if you look at what an emergency is from the perspective of women, we are living in a global state of emergency absolutely everywhere. Because all of the agreements, the programs, the aid interventions, and the acronyms that we throw around, those are all not translating into safety for women. And even aid workers, you know, as a former humanitarian aid worker, even female humanitarian aid workers are not safe. We did a survey and got 600 responses in 5 days. Of those, 41% said that sexual harassment was their biggest concern. 400 shared personal stories of what they've experienced in the field. Mine was one of those. So if the very systems and structures that we have to deliver equality can't even keep their own people safe, I don't know what hope that we have. You know, we still meet again and again, and we want to know why. Why? I don't think that this is a time for why. I think we've done that. I think now is the time for how. You know, it's nice to be back in Sweden because I seem to be here very often. I love your people and politics, and I certainly love your licorice. Thank you so much. I don't know about your weather, but, you know, I speak at so many conferences, and I lose my voice, and I don't know where my words go anymore. And all of this now, as the local partner, I'm no longer with the UN, I'm no longer working in emergencies, although I think our lives are a perpetual emergency. But as the local partner, I'm often asked to give the local perspective and speak and participate in committees, and I do that all as if I'm a goodwill ambassador without any funding. You know, I think this is a very dangerous trend, because what we talk about is localization and the grand bargain and funding women's organizations and whatever, and yet our expectations of them, I think, don't meet our commitments. And there's always a challenge. I have a moral dilemma in coming. I thought I was going to say no to this event because my presence here comes at a cost to me, to my institute, and to the movement. I'm responsible for my institute's survival, and the institute is responsible for doing what needs to be done for Arab women specifically. And the movement suffers when we continue to talk more than we act. You know, a movement, it implies that there are people willing to move and move in the same direction. And although I believe in what we do and I speak all the time and I want to see, as you've committed in this forum, I want to see real equality. I want to see a counter against those who are fighting equality. And I want to support those who are at the forefront of equality. You know, Sweden, there's a global leadership vacuum. You've heard it and you know it. And you've just heard that this issue engages Sweden a little bit extra. So I'm coming here with a plea that Sweden be a little bit extra engaged. I'm not done yet. I have one more minute. One more minute. I see the rest of the world that's moving backwards, and I want Sweden to move forwards and do it faster. I just want to say that when I was last here, it was the Stockholm Gender Forum, and I taught everybody a word. It's probably a word you know, that implies forward movement and momentum and action. It's an Arabic word and it's yalla, everybody knows it. And I said, yalla forward, and that became the motto of the forum. And so what I want is really for us to move yalla forward. I want us to be angry. I keep saying I'm angry all the time. 14-year-old me is angry. And that's because this cause, it really is the rage of my life. And I know our rage is right, and our rage will bring us courage, and that courage is contagious. And I want us to learn from movements that are doing it better than we are. Look at Extinction Rebellion. We need a rebellion for women's rights, do we not? Look at your own Greta. We need a Greta for women's rights. Where is everybody screaming? Why is everybody not angry? You know, pushing back on the pushback, it puts us, it's good, but it's not enough. It puts us right back to where we are now, and status quo isn't good enough. What we had before wasn't good enough. What we have now certainly is not good enough. So I'd like us to go forward and fight forward and yalla forward. I don't want us to continue to meet to discuss gender equality. I want us to take it. I think the 3.7 billion women in the world have been denied equality for too long, and I'd like us to not wait a single day longer. So together, I hope that we will change what it means to be a woman in the world, not for 2030, but now. Thank you.
Wow.
I could have some water now.
So I will start by saying, Yalla, how? You didn't want to talk, so let's start with that. How? How do we tackle this? I mean, I think a lot of us can really recognize the picture that you're drawing. You talk about conference after conference. I think within the human rights world, I think a lot of us have experienced that the last 30 years, in one way, have been like a victory march, right? We have seen new conventions. We've seen new kind of legislation. We've seen all kinds of mechanisms being put in place. And still, here we are, still talking, right?
Exactly
so
right.
What are we doing? How?
Okay, well, I think we need to look at our movement. Our movement is fragmented. We have so many events and processes, and we're commemorating all these anniversaries, 10 and 20 and 50 years of whatever. For ICPD, I said, please don't invite me to ICPD 50. I hope I am dead. Because if that has happened, that means we haven't done our job. What we need to do is actually learn from the opposition. They're much smarter than we are. They speak with one voice, and they've determined that they have non-negotiables. Do we have a non-negotiable? Do we have a one thing that we're fighting for that all of us can stand up and agree to? I'm not really sure. I think what is beautiful about us is our diversity, but it's also become a weakness. And what I don't see is that kind of anger, a strong voice, this no more, here is the line, and we're not going back, and we're only moving forward from here. So I feel like we've become these fragmented kinds of conversations that is a lot more talk than action. It's the way we allocate resources. You see it in the money. You see it in the way we have events and different events and parallel events. And actually, none of these events are really communicating with each other. You know, I feel like I could spend my year going from conference to conference. But is that really the best use of me? It's not. I should be back where I belong, doing the work that needs to be done. And so I think we really need to consider those kinds of things.
Well, Lina, anyway, you are a strong voice, and we are very happy that you did not refuse to come. So I think we should give her a warm round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.